administration?
Well, as Israel Riley pointed out earlier on, this government made some promises right at the start of its tenure that it would seriously look into creation of employment, and one of the vehicles that it proposed to use was that of industrialization. When this government came into office, how many industries were working? And if we extend it to the whole country, how many industries that were alive 8 years ago are still alive today? One of the fundamental critical problems that we're facing with regards to industrialization is that of power. Recognizing that the issue of power is at the doorstep of the federal government and not in the remit of the state, we have to take alternative measures. And the government did two things. On the one hand, the government said we need to have our very own independent power plant. And if you can produce your own power within the state, then you can drive your own industrial project. And as Israel has already indicated, I'll reiterate, it's already 90% complete. And in the shortest possible time, we'll go live with our own IPP. And we'll be able to drive our own industrial project, situated mainly in the South Senatorial District, because the power plant is located strategically very close to the major link road between the south, the east, and the northern parts of the country. Now, the second thing that we also considered was that whilst we're waiting for our industrial projects to germinate, we needed to look at other ways of creating employment, creating wealth. And that is why things like WECA were designed 7 years ago as a conduit for creating employment and addressing the issue of youth unemployment. If you can use agriculture as a pedestal to pivot your youth into meaningful employment, then you'll be able to solve some of the social ills that we have. And we're not just taking our youth to the farms. What we're doing is what we call agro-based development. We are creating entrepreneurs. We're creating future businessmen with their base being that of agriculture. When you talk about the various departments that you have in WECA, you'll find that it's not just about chickens and eggs. It's not just about poultry, but they've gone into animal husbandry, they've gone into fishery, they've gone into sericulture, they've gone into the production of cotton. And these are things that you wouldn't have thought about ordinarily when you're talking about WECA. But there are so many sophisticated areas of endeavor that the agency is addressing. And what they're doing is taking the youth from the street and saying, look, we can use agriculture as our backbone and create entrepreneurs and create businessmen who will in turn employ other youths and engage them. And those are the two ways in which we've been able to tackle our initial problem of bringing industrialization as a revolution. It's still going to happen. Don't mince words here. It's still going to happen. The fact that it hasn't happened now is that we've been partly paralyzed by the lack of power. And in fact, it has got worse. It has got worse in the last 16, 17 months. In the last 1 year, we have witnessed 0 megawatts of output. And this is why we continue to say that we have a government at the top that does not have a clue about how to run the country. We have a government at the top that is taking us into recession, and they blame it on the fall in oil prices and output. Guess what? Over the last decade, our GDP has only been represented by 15% from oil receipts. So it means that 85% comes from other areas of productive lines. So why would this government be given the excuse of recession? It's down to their policies, unpopular economic policies that have forced us into recession. And what makes matters worse is for them to tell us in August that we're in recession, and by December we're going to be out of it. Developed nations of the world go into recession and they stay in recession for at least 5, 6, 7 years before they begin to see a glimmer of light or a flicker of light at the end of the tunnel. But this government is so wound up in its own propaganda that it wants us to believe that it's possible for a country to go into recession, a nation to go into recession in August and come out of it in December.
I mean, all of those things you're saying about governance at a national level boils down to just one thing, and that's corruption, according to Mr. President. Now, if we are to put politics aside just for a second,
it boils down to
corruption, which the President Muhammadu Buhari-led government has said this has been made possible due to how your party ran government in the last 16 years. But now let's even put that aside because of our time now. The fight against corruption really took an interesting dimension with the clampdown on some judges over the weekend. You are a lawyer. Now, if we put politics aside for a minute, don't you think with this the president deserves an applause?
We are applauding the president. We're applauding the president because his chief of staff was allegedly involved in collecting over 500 million naira.
I'm talking of the clampdown on judges.
Yeah, that's we're still on track. Mr. President was confronted with this allegation that why would he collect a kickback or a bung or a gift of 500 million to help MTN reduce their fine. Now, this was a fine that was imposed. It was a sanction that was imposed. And somebody in the presidency was working to reduce it. So Mr. President must be applauded that that officer is still in government. Mr. President must be applauded that the Minister of Transport, time and time again, before his appointment, during his appointment, and again, his name has been mentioned in bribing judges to get the right result.
That's the allegation.
But in proper climes, where you're fighting corruption, what you do is you ask such an officer to step aside. Step aside until those allegations can be either founded or unfounded, proved or unproved. But you don't allow a person of authority to stay in position where he has access to all the paraphernalia of government that will now quench or quash or extinguish any further investigations. You see, what is happening is this fight against corruption, which they continue to herald, is cosmetic. The government is running to 2 years. Out of all the people they said they fraudulently took away loot and money belonging to the public purse of Nigeria, how many of them have been convicted? We're still waiting to hear of one person. Whether it's opposition or it's no opposition, we don't mind. But if you're fighting corruption in 2 years, we must have seen at least one result. I know how many people were rightly or wrongly convicted under the first tenure of Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. Even a minister was incarcerated and he was convicted. More than one. So when this government comes out very boldly and strongly in their 3-point agenda, that one of them is going to be corruption, then you have to ask questions whether they're serious about it. And when there are blemishes from your own government officers on your own table, and you selectively use authorities such as the DSS to harm the judges, then we have to ask questions. But going to the core of this arrest on the judges, everybody knows about separation of powers and rule of law. And as a student of government in the secondary or elementary school, we know that each arm has to rest on its own. The legislature, the executive, and judiciary should be allowed to do their work. That is separation of powers. But what did you have? On day one, this same executive under our president, who we are applauding, sent his hounds onto the leadership of the National Assembly, and they're still in court. Now they have sent their hounds onto the judges. They're not obeying the rule of law. Let each organ regulate itself. If you say that a crime has been committed, then let the normal course take its course. There are rules, there are procedures, there are ways in which you deal with criminal activity. And we in the PDP are not condoning. Even our own people of past who were accused of financial crimes, then by all means, through the rule of law, through the set procedures, then go after them and prosecute them. But I can bet you that at the expiration of the first term of this administration, we still would not have had one successful conviction. And as a lawyer, and as a person who has prosecuted serious fraud in the United Kingdom for at least 8 years, I can tell you that we do not start our investigations when we knock on your door. Knocking on the door of judges at 1 a.m., knocking on the door of a Supreme Court judge, telling him to put his hands up is not how to investigate a crime. A financial crime ought to have been investigated with all your papers in place. It's called front loading. So you know what the crime is. You have the evidences. You then charge and go straight to court. But now they've moved in, they've caused embarrassment for the judges, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. In another 7 years' time, we'll say we're fighting corruption and we still don't have a conviction. And that is not the way to fight corruption. That is, it's again this government that has policies, has programs, hasn't thought it through, and then on the cuff, they're doing A or B. They're always reversing themselves. 1 minute you're banning rice, the next minute you're lifting the ban. 1 minute you're saying we have to produce ourselves, the next minute you realize that we're not producing enough. Prices of rice has gone through the roof. It's going to be 40,000 naira by the end of the month. Then you're now thinking about maybe we need to reverse ourselves. That is the typical practice of a government that did not think about governance. And if they could do it at the national level, we certainly don't want them to come and do that in Ondo State. And that is the warning we're giving.
And just before you go, in the statement released by the DSS, it was said that certain evidences were found in the houses of those judges that were arrested. Now, if they
evidences, like what?
Cash.
Like cash.
Yeah.
Cash that they might have brought in.
What do you mean by
that? Raises the doubt.
No, they were found in the house.
The DSS that turned up at 1 a.m. in the dark. Do we know how many Ghana must go bags they brought in? They say they found. You went at an unholy hour to execute a search warrant. It raises questions about what you brought into the premises straight away. So I'm not saying that they didn't find, but you've raised a doubt. And in law and in criminal law, as soon as there's a doubt, you have to acquit. You cannot convict. So why was it necessary to go in the dark to execute a search warrant? It just wasn't necessary.
Was they now say, operation?
What sting? Who are you stinging? The DSS are required to deal with matters of terrorism and internal security, not sting on financial. Why do we have the EFCC? Why do we have the ICPC? We have those institutions to carry out operations that are related to financial crimes. So there's a usurpation of authority by the DSS in the first instance, unless they can tell me that it's linked to terrorism or it's linked to the internal security. And even if you are going to do that at 1 a.m., for God's sake, it raises the question as to whether this, and we're hearing now that it's all related to political judgments that were given in tribunal. If you want to execute a legal matter, do it with clean hands.
All right, because of our
following
time,
the law,
there are so many things to talk about, but then we'll need to take a break now to come back again next week and setting the record straight. But then I play those to the Secretary of Orange Youth Network, Mr. Israel Fagbemi.
Thank you very much.
Nice having you around.
It's been nice having you.
All right, and also to a barrister at law, Mr. Gbenga Akimoyo, Special Assistant and Media to the Ondo State Governor. Thank you very much for coming.
It's been a pleasure once again.
My name is Adeolu Boyega. By the special grace of the Almighty, we'll be back again next week, same time, same station. Goodbye.